And I think Alabama understands A, what he means to the program, B, how good he is, and C, what Alabama means to him. I mean, it's a case of he grew up an Alabama fan. He grew up in Saraland. He grew up a guy seeing the Nick Saban dynasty and what that meant. That doesn't mean that he could never go somewhere else. It's just that it means a little bit more to him. Like he's got some personal stock in Alabama. It's not just here's a school that he happened to go to.
Beat Everyone is brought to you by Broadway Joe's Fantasy Sports, inspired by football legend Joe Namath. Embrace the thrill of daily fantasy sports like never before in a new app coming soon. Hey, welcome to Beat Everyone. I am Ben Flanagan with AL.com. Things are moving and shaking right now. The transfer portal is officially open, and that means schools are open for business. And we've already seen several Alabama players hit the portal. Backup quarterback Dylan Lonergan, wide receivers like Kendrick Law, Kobe Prentice, Caleb Odom, other players like Keanu Coate, Jaheim Otis, Hunter Osborne, Miles McVay, other guys you've never even heard of until now that they hit the portal. That seems like a lot, but as of today, it's actually on the lower end in the SEC. The good thing for Alabama is that this goes both ways, right? Like, this is where a lot of recruiting happens in the NIL and transfer portal era. Look at some of Alabama's key players the last few years, guys from this past season like Jeremy Bernard, Graham Nicholson, CJ Dupree, LT Overton, and then guys from recent years like Jermaine Burton and Jahmyr Gibbs, Jamison Williams. You like those guys? I think so. And the good thing for us here at Beat Everyone is that we have the best person to break it all down. No pressure, but AL.com Alabama football reporter Nick Kelly is here with us right now. Nick, you've been a busy man these last few days, ever since Alabama was left out of the college football playoff, along with our friend of the podcast and your colleague on the beat, Matt Stahl. I mean, I said things were moving and shaking. Nobody knows this better than the two of you. I mean, you write 10 stories, you close the laptop, you take a breath, you sit down maybe for a bite to eat or a nap or something, and then you get pinged by the portal again. How are you holding up right now?
Doing great. It's busy, but it's a fun time of year. I enjoy the energy of it, and hey, just a couple extra cups of coffee, and you just knuckle down and get through it.
Yeah, it's white knuckle time too. It really is, and you guys are doing an awesome job. Before we get to the portal, though, Nick, I mean, Alabama's going to play in a bowl game that nobody's ever heard of in Tampa on New Year's Eve. It's become trendy and even maybe financially responsible for players to opt out of a non-college football playoff postseason game like this. What are you hearing right now about opt-outs ahead of Alabama's rematch with Michigan?
Early on, the thought was that there would be a lot of opt outs, but at this point, there might not be as many as I think the knee jerk reaction was. I think we're looking maybe at more players participating than we thought. I mean, Kalen DeBoer, when he talked about it the Sunday when the playoff was decided, he seemed pretty convinced that there weren't going to be a ton of opt outs. Now, of course, you've got some guys going in the portal, still some decisions to be made, but bowl practice starts this week. So we'll have a pretty good indication pretty fast as to who's participating and who isn't, but it might be fewer than you would expect.
It's good news for Alabama fans. I think they were all anticipating the Alabama team looking a lot different on December 31st than what it looked like with their last game in the Iron Bowl, right? Like, once Alabama didn't make it, then that led a lot of air was out of the sail, and people just assumed, okay, this season's over for everybody, for the fans and for the players and for DeBoer, so that they could move on and start essentially rebuilding. But we'll get to that. Let's move to the portal right now, because, some of the players entering the portal, it's interesting because, I mentioned a few, including Kendrick Law. He was in many ways a fan favorite, an important piece of Kalen DeBoer's offense, especially as a blocker, but he rarely touched the ball in 2024. Limited touches, surprising, because you hear that, this guy's one of the fastest on the team. He's one of the strongest on the team. So you would think you want to put the ball in that guy's hands, but you've got to think that he and some of the other receivers were unhappy with their roles, at least as pass catchers, with so many targets going Ryan Williams' way, even Jeremy Bernard's, especially as the season developed. Why do players like Kendrick Law and those other receivers, why do they see a future outside of Tuscaloosa?
Yeah, I think this offense was a bit of a bridge offense, if you will, Ben, of taking what Alabama had and what it still has to an extent, and bridging it with what Kalen DeBoer wants to run in future years. And so I think a lot of it was when you got red paint, paint the barn red kind of thing. And so they did a lot of that, which meant you have a quarterback in Jalen Milrow who is a dual threat passer. He's a guy who's running, he's passing, and you play to his skill sets. I think in some ways, the offense in 2023 could have ran him more, frankly, because he is so good at it. They lean into that this year. The running backs are blocking a lot, maybe more so than they were even carrying the football. The receivers were blocking more because you had a guy running in Jalen. Um, so I think it really was an offense that was built for Jalen's skill set, or they tried to build it for his skill set, which I think lent itself to less passing, maybe less downfield than Alabama or some of these receivers maybe wanted to do. But you look at someone like Kendrick Law; he's been someone who's had a few offensive coordinators. And he's a gadget player of sorts, but I don't know if they've quite figured out how to use him to what he's best suited for. So I think for his sake, he could find a good spot that knows how to use him well because he is kind of a unique player. But I think now Alabama will have a chance to go and try to get maybe some receivers who better suit their offense and they can tailor it more toward that. So some good players, some good weapons, but maybe just don't quite fit what they're trying to do. But I think we'll start to see a little bit more of that DeBoer offense as they kind of change over the playbook and start to get to more of what he wants to do.
Well, Nick, what about Ryan Williams? Because a big narrative for some fans is, can Alabama keep the phenom receiver, right? The 17-year-old. Has he even turned 18 yet? When does he turn 18?
February, so he's got a while still.
Okay, so he is 17, confirmed. A lot of chatter and anxiety that he would be one and done in Tuscaloosa, right? Like some other program with a lot of NIL cash would lure him away. But I mean, he just revealed that he's got a new Script A tattoo on his leg. So should fans rest assured that Ryan Williams is here to stay? What do you think?
I mean, nothing is ever 100% certain. Tattooed even. I mean, getting a tattoo, I think, is obviously a good sign, but I was pretty confident even before the tattoo that he wasn't going to go anywhere. And I think Alabama understands A, what he means to the program, B, how good he is, and C, what Alabama means to him. I mean, it's a case of he grew up an Alabama fan. He grew up in Saraland. He grew up a guy seeing the Nick Saban dynasty and what that meant. That doesn't mean that he could never go somewhere else. It's just that it means a little bit more to him. Like he's got some personal stock in Alabama. It's not just here's a school that he happened to go to. Now that alone would not prevent him from going somewhere else, but I think it helps. Doesn't hurt. He's also got his podcast. He's got certain friendships. I mean, also just even the celebrity that he's built here in Alabama, I think goes a long way for him. So I was never super concerned, and I'm still not super concerned. Now, Alabama still has to play some defense. They still have to make sure they keep him. I mean, they can't just rest on their laurels, but he's a guy that I think that values the personal relationships he has in Tuscaloosa and really likes being in Alabama.
The fact that I have a podcast gets me out of a lot of jams, Nick. I can just use that. But the fact that in 2024, we're talking about guys staying out of school because of his podcast, that's so funny to me. But one guy I want to remind you about is Reuben Foster, right? Famously has a tattoo on his arm, I think, of the Auburn logo. And, we won't get into the Reuben Foster story. And he's obviously a character unto himself, not saying like every player is like him, because they're certainly not. But things change, and you're right, nothing is 100% certain. But what I can tell you is that fans hope that they're 100% certain that Ryan Williams is going to come back for his sophomore season. So I did say, though, that this goes both ways, right, with the portal. Like, I mean, I think everybody focuses on who all Alabama is losing, and it's just a great place for coaches like DeBoer to go in and recruit new talent who can strengthen the roster and strengthen depth. And you wrote a piece for AL.com, and the headline was "Positions to Watch for Alabama Football in Transfer Portal." Pretty straightforward, right? If you want to get answers on this, go read that, read Nick's coverage. But why don't we go position by position right now, Nick, where Alabama might be seeing a lot of movement, but the position isn't necessarily on your list in this piece. But I want to start with quarterback, if that's okay, because we just heard that Dylan Lonergan, the backup quarterback, is likely to enter the portal. He's going to test the waters. And I don't think that was a shock to anybody's system that Dylan Lonergan might not stick around. But, there remain a lot of questions about the 2024 starter, Jalen Milrow, right? That he could maybe even come back to Alabama if he wanted to. He could leave for the NFL draft. He could even transfer and play somewhere else. And as of now, If I had to press you on it, Nick, Jalen Milroe is doing what in 2025?
I think he's going to the NFL draft. That'd be my guess if I'm putting a prediction in, so to speak. I mean, I don't know that with 100% certainty, but that just would be my prediction. I mean, you look at even more so just what else is there at quarterback. ESPN has him as the number 4 quarterback right now behind Shadur Sanders, Cam Ward, and Quinn Ewers. So that's a pretty good spot to be in, especially if teams need quarterbacks. And he could easily be a day one, maybe day two guy. And especially when you look at his measurables, just what he can do physically, some team is going to fall in love with that and be convinced that they can take that and turn him into a really good player. And I'm not saying that it's going to take some absolute magic. I just think that teams fall in love with measurables and what they see potential wise. And so I think, and yeah, also he's been, I mean, I believe he's getting his master's or he's about to get his master's. So to a certain extent, maybe he just wants to be done with college and at some point he's got to make that jump. Doesn't mean 100% it's going to happen, but again, that'd be my prediction for where he ends up at the end of the season.
Yeah, for sure. You did mention he is getting his master's degree. He just won the Campbell Trophy, right, which is for the Scholar Athlete of the Year. So
Academic
congratulations.
Heisman.
Awesome. Congratulations to Jalen Milroe. I watched his speech. It was fantastic. The guy has always been an outstanding representative of the University of Alabama, and that was just another example. If you haven't watched it, go watch it. It's great. So depending on what happens, a lot of dominoes would fall either way, right? Like if Milroe stays, presumably Ty Simpson might transfer, right? So you've got Austin Mack potentially staying as a backup, and you have recently crowned Gatorade Player of the Year, Keelan Russell, coming in as a true freshman, someone that many people have kind of dubbed the future of the position. So if Jalen Milroe leaves, you would think Ty Simpson gets first crack at QB1, or maybe DeBoer even opens up the competition and starts fresh at Alabama. So or maybe they look in the portal, Nick, who knows? Like, I mean, read Kalen DeBoer's mind for us right now. What do you think he wants to do at quarterback?
So here's how I think it'll play out. If I'm making a prediction based on what I know, what I've heard, again, there are no certainties with 100% in college football these days, but just kind of how would see it playing out is Jalen probably goes to the draft. Ty Simpson is essentially in pole position for that starting quarterback job. I think that he's be the favorite. He's not going to be handed the position because they have an Austin Mack, they have a Keelan Russell coming in. They're really intriguing prospects, but Ty's waited his time, and they're not just going to give it to him because he's waited. I mean, it's not just a hey, you've been around the longest. Here's your the trophy. Essentially, he's going to have to earn it. But I think there's a lot of optimism around the program that he can earn it, that he can be the guy. Maybe he wasn't ready in 23 when he was in that competition with Jalen, but he's got another 2 seasons under his belt since that competition. He's older now. He's more mature. He's got a better understanding what it takes to play quarterback at the college level. So I would expect him to be in pole position. He's going to have every chance to win the job. And I think he probably will. So if I had to guess an opening day starter at this juncture, what is it, December 11th for 2025, I would guess that Ty Simpson is that guy. He'd be my projection. Again, a lot could play out before then. We got to see him go through spring. We got to see who's here, just all sorts of things. But at this point, I would be surprised if the quarterback room isn't Ty Simpson, Austin Mack, and Keelan Russell manning that spot. Maybe they add a veteran, maybe they add someone else, but I think that's going to be your main core right there. At this point, I don't see them going after a major portal quarterback. That surprised me a lot. I mean, you can never say never about anything again. I've learned the hard way of being when you try to be too certain about anything in right now in this portal era. But no, it would surprise me a lot if they were to add a portal guy at the end of the day.
Unless there's like a lacrosse player in the portal that they could bring in and be the backup and maybe even a starter at one point for some bizarre reason. You never know, man.
What a hypothetical.
I don't know where that came from, but I mean, Ty Simpson kind of on the Mac Jones path, right? That's a trajectory that he has even compared himself to, I think, out loud. And that's similar to like when Mac Jones was, part of the program for a long time. And then you had Bryce Young coming in as this blue chip true freshman. And some people even assumed that he would take the job, but Mac Jones bided his time. He knew the system and he was the starter, and Bryce Jones was right there waiting in the wings, similar to how Keelan Russell, I assume, will be. So it's going to be interesting. I tend to agree with you, but weirder things have happened. But losing all this depth at wide receiver, it indicates to me that DeBoer may have to find it in the portal. I mean, there's a lot of talent out there, and I just want to know what you think. Where might Alabama find it with so many guys on the way out and with Ryan Williams probably needing to bring some of the heat off him.
Yeah, well, look to a guy who's expected to visit this week, Kevin Concepcion from NC State. He's supposed to. My sources are telling me he's supposed to be on campus at some point this week, and he's a guy who there's a connection with this staff. Jatavis Sanders, the director of recruiting, he knows Kevin, or KC is kind of his nickname, from NC State. That's where Jatavis came from before he joined Courtney Morgan's personnel staff. So there's that relationship there. They can get him on campus. Good chance he commits. I think there's a good shot they add a guy like that, and he'd be a real interesting guy to have offensively. I mean, just a real quick, speedy, just interesting player to be able to get the ball to, make plays with his legs. I mean, just all kinds of exciting things he could do. He could be great in the short area quickness in terms of 2-point conversions kind of scenarios, or when you're close to the goal line. So I think he'd be a really nice weapon to add to that receiver room.
Well, an offensive tackle is a position that you cover in the piece that I mentioned. Why is that such a focus for Alabama moving forward?
I think you got to get some more certainty there, some more consistency there. That was a big issue for what they had at the right tackle spot with Wilkin Formby at first, and then Elijah Pritchett. So I think that they would like to find maybe something a bit more reliable or veteran. I mean, they're bringing in some young, talented players at that position, but no matter what happens, I think that they need to maybe bring in a little bit more veteran presence. I mean, of course, everyone would love to have great offensive linemen, and Alabama's not alone in that. So just wanting that and getting that are two different things. But I think, yeah, they'd benefit a lot from having a reliable presence at that right tackle spot. You look at pressures this season, Pro Football Focus tallies that. Elijah Pritchett gave up by far the most, and it wasn't even close. I think it was like 28 by him compared to like 11 by Proctor, who's the next highest in pressures allowed. So it wasn't even close. And that's not to say that maybe Elijah can't improve, but at this point, he's a few seasons in. I think that it might be smart to look what else is out there, see if you can improve in that spot. And Kalen DeBoer kind of alluded to that this past Sunday, of looking where you can improve, where you can maybe get better in certain spots. Because in a lot of ways, this past season, again, it was a bridge season in the standpoint, from the standpoint of, you just kind of have to take what you have to an extent. Like Kalen talked about how just roster retention was their biggest focus when they got here, because they couldn't go get that many quality portal players because most of them were picked over at that point in January. And the only players going in at that point still were Washington and Michigan, because they had coaching changes. So yeah, it's a case of now you can maybe get a little, I don't want to say greedy, but you can start looking at, okay, what is out there? We have more wide of a pick, and we can upgrade at this position. And to me, tackle would be a spot you look to upgrade at.
I could always count on you, Nick, on Sunday or Monday, whenever it was, to share those Pro Football Focus stats on the offensive line. Who had the most pressures, who had the cleanest day, et cetera. Always counted on that. Always look forward to it, too. So thank you. Going in between receivers and the offensive line, right? Moving to tight end here. C.J. Dupree and Robbie Oots, both seniors. There's obviously a need at the position. This seems like Portal City for Alabama at this position, don't you think?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, they're bringing in a guy, Luke Haas from Arkansas, who's an intriguing prospect. He's got some experience there. He's expected to visit. Of course, these things can always change, but as of right now, he's expected to make a visit to Tuscaloosa soon. And yeah, it's a position where just bodies wise, they're losing people. I mean, you got, like you mentioned, C.J. Dupree, Robbie Oots. I believe they both are seeing their eligibility expire, and they were both, quality blockers and receivers. Even they made some plays. So you need to replace that. You need guys who can be physical like that. And then Danny Lewis goes to the portal. Josh Cuevas set to be back, and so that's a good piece to have. But yeah, they just need a little, and they have some young guys, but you need some players brought in who have some more experience, and just some guys who overall have played some SEC snaps. And so I think a guy like Luke Haas would be a good guy to bring in, and if not him, someone else.
I didn't think anybody's eligibility could expire anymore in college football. I mean, they're either leaving for the draft, or they have that COVID year, or they're going to court and asking for an extra year. You've got guys who are going to be playing college football for like an eighth straight year. Now you've got guys who are playing on their sixth team in 5 years in some cases. I mean, it's out of control right now, but this is the system that we're working with, right? And the last position that you talk about in your piece is pass rusher, right? You note that Alabama struggled putting pressure on the quarterback in 2024, especially without difference makers like Will Anderson and Dallas Turner. They also lost Q Robinson midway through the season. You see this as a pretty big need for Alabama, don't you?
Yeah, you asked me earlier about, hey, portal quarterback, do we look into that kind of thing? It's like, to me, if you're going to, you kind of have to spend to get defensive difference makers up front. If you're going to go spend on that instead of a portal quarterback, because obviously that tends to be pretty costly too. But yeah, they just need some guys who can just win one-on-one matchups and just, again, everyone would love to have a Will Anderson or Dallas Turner, no doubt, but just guys who every week offenses are kind of scared to run against or scared to play against, and they have to account for. I don't know that Alabama had enough of those guys in the front seven outside of maybe in the middle with Jahad Campbell and Deontay Lawson that really scared opposing offenses. I think it forced Kane Womack, the defensive coordinator, to really come up with creative pressures, creative ways to get pressure. And so I think they just need some more difference makers up front. And so if you have a chance to go get someone like that in the portal and spend a little bit money to spend a little bit of money to do that, I would do it.
Nick, let's go macro here. I mean, how is Alabama navigating the portal? I mean, do you get the sense that DeBoer or the program has an edge one way or the other, or are they just kind of like everybody else, still trying to figure out how to navigate this uncharted territory?
Yeah, I think they're in a healthy spot. I think that it has improved even post Nick Saban. Everyone talks about, maybe there's a Saban discount, so to speak. And there probably was, because if you get a chance to go play for Nick Saban, I mean, heck, I'd take that opportunity if I was a 17, 18, 19-year old trying to go play college football. I mean, and I might take less money to do that. And Alabama, I think, has improved NIL wise since then, just because you have to have money to be competitive. I mean, just because you spend doesn't mean you're going to be successful. You just look at Ole Miss; they didn't make the playoff, but they spent a good amount of money on their roster. Um, but you definitely aren't probably going to be successful if you don't spend money. And I think that Alabama is in a healthy spot NIL wise. Can always be better. I don't know that they have stupid money. I don't know that there's crazy money, but they have enough to be competitive. And the proof is in the pudding. I mean, if Alabama didn't have that kind of money, I mean, no, we're not hearing like what each contract is worth or how much each guy's getting paid like you would in the NFL potentially. But if Alabama didn't have that money, you would not see them getting what they're getting. I mean, they're not bargain shopping. They're not in the bargain bin for players. Now, if a guy is just chasing the top dollar and that's all he wants, then yeah, maybe they're not going to get that guy. But I think there are enough smart players who recognize, okay, I'll get developed here, I'll get this, I'll get that. That's not necessarily what is my NIL check. It could just be, okay, this is what I'm getting X amount of money, but which is not near as high as this other school, but this is a much better fit for me. And I think there's enough guys like that out there. It's not just guys chasing the biggest dollar they can get. Now, I think you have to pay guys a certain amount. I think that is required. There's kind of a floor, so to speak. But anyways, all that to say, I think Alabama's in a solid spot. And if they weren't, you would not see them adding players like they seem to be.
I have one more personnel question, right? I forgot to ask you about running backs because you have these talented running backs like Justice Haynes and Jam Miller. Any running back, especially from the last couple of decades, they come to Alabama because they want to be the next Mark Ingram. They want to be the next Derrick Henry. They want to be the next Najee Harris, not just to have a great career at Alabama, potentially win a Heisman and all sorts of other accolades, but to get to the NFL and get drafted in the first round or the second round and get paid, right? And Alabama was always the one of the best paths towards that result. But this past season is obviously such an anomaly for maybe a bunch of different reasons. But I think a lot of fans are also concerned that players like Justice Haynes and Jan Miller, they could kind of be eyeing the transfer portal a little bit too, because the offense didn't really do much for them in terms of, showing what they could do, right? And maybe they want to go elsewhere and be a featured back in a way that they haven't been able to in Tuscaloosa in their young careers so far. So are you hearing anything about the future of Alabama's current running backs who are both very talented?
Yeah, I haven't heard anything concrete that I can share necessarily, but it wouldn't surprise me if, say, a Justice Haynes went in the portal. I'm not saying that that's going to happen, but it could make sense. He only had one game where he got double-digit carries, so if he wants to go somewhere else where he's used more, I don't think anyone would blame him. But at the same time, it kind of depends on what those discussions are like with the coaching staff. Of, hey, yeah, when Jalen was here, maybe you had less carries. But in a new offense where, say, Ty Simpson's quarterback, there probably are going to be more carries for running backs because they're not going to Jalen. They're not going to the quarterback. Now, I will say Ty's kind of a sneaky runner. He's actually not too bad in the open field. He's definitely not Jalen Milrow because Jalen's kind of one of one in the open field. But um, if Ty's the quarterback, I think the best way to put it is maybe design runs won't completely go away, but I think there will be fewer than there were with Jalen Milrow. So I think at running back, you have those discussions, you listen, and you see what kind of role they envision for you. But I think no one would blame Justice, say, that if he moved on or looked to something else, or Jam for that matter. But Jam got more carries than Justice did this past year. So I think it's just when we'll see mode where you could understand it. But at this point, I don't have a conclusive this is happening or this isn't happening. But I think it could make sense if that's what he feels is best.
Yeah, Ty Simpson, you're right. Sneaky wheels. He's pretty fast. I mean, he's not Jalen Milrow, who is, right? But I remember, was it last year? Was it MTSU or another game? I'm forgetting which it was, where he had like a 70-yard, what would have been a touchdown run had he
And he
not
dropped it.
dropped the ball right before it crossed the plane. So he proved that he can run. You just got to, you got to finish, man. That's what Nick Saban would say, right?
Hand the ball to the ref. That's what you have to do.
All right, last question, Nick. How different is this roster going to look in 2025? Because I think that there is some anxiety among the fan base right now. Kalen DeBoer's first season very quickly became playoff or bust, and he missed the playoff by the hair of his chinny chin, right? And they're on the outside looking in, and now it becomes all right. Well, 2025. Alabama and Kalen DeBoer better get into the playoff, but you kind of have to look at it as much of a transition season as his first season, because you're installing everything permanently at this point and you're having to sort of rebuild. Is this a total rebuild for Alabama? I mean, are they at risk of that? Because if it is, then I don't know how you could make the playoff.
Yeah, I don't think it's a total rebuild. I think that it's almost, you could call it a 2-year rebuilding process. You have that bridge year. I keep using that term, but I think it applies well. Of you kind of are just trying to make do with what you have, make do with the talent you have, the people you have, and try to run your system as much as you can, but really just use what you have before. And Kalen's done this, I mean, multiple times in the past decade. Took over at Fresno, took over at Washington, took over at Alabama. So he's used to kind of this progression. And you see, he does pretty well in year two. Washington, he went to the national championship game in year two. So I think that there's some optimism around what they can do with a full season, a full off season. I mean, again, he took over mid-January, didn't have a lot of his staff in place until I think mid to late February. And that's time that they'll have back now because they have this bowl game to get ready for. They have a few practices before then. They can go get the talent that fits them better. They can pull from more of that talent pool. So, yeah, are you changing things? Yes. I think the rebuild term is a very loaded term and sounds kind of like a reset. I don't think they're knocking down the entire foundation and rebuilding Mal Moore. That's not, I think, what they're doing. But I think there's going to be some differences. I think you're going to see some turnover, whether it be guys who gave the Kalen DeBoer experience a chance and they're like, it's not for me, or vice versa. If Kalen DeBoer gave this player a chance and that wasn't, he didn't quite fit what Kalen DeBoer wants to do. And it's, hey, appreciate what you did, but maybe it'd be best if, you go somewhere else, kind of thing. I mean, I think there's both that can happen. So will there be change? Yes. Will there be as much change as last year? Probably not, because there was a lot of roster turnover last year. But I think at this point, forget coaching change, second year, whatever it might be. I think you're going to see most rosters turn over by at least 20%, if not 30 or 40%, depending on the situation every year, because you just have guys leaving. You have other teams offering backups maybe twice what the current team would be offering them because the current team is paying their starters, kind of thing. And so it's such a unique market. And I think it's evolving every single year, every single cycle. But as far as a rebuild, I don't know, but I think it is going to look a good bit different. But that can be a good thing as Kalen DeBoer gets his system and his way of doing things into Mal Moore.
Great stuff, Nick. I mean, we're less than 3 weeks away from the Vision Quest Bowl or whatever it's called. But I know that we're going to want to hear from you again before Alabama takes on the rematch against Michigan that everybody wanted to see in the exact context we're going to see it in. He is AL.com Alabama football reporter Nick Kelly. He's one of the best that you can follow and read right now. Nick, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Ben. Talk to you later.
All right, you can find Beat Everyone on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, review. I'm Ben Flanagan with AL.com. We'll see you next time. Beat Everyone is brought to you by Broadway Joe's Fantasy Sports, inspired by football legend Joe Namath. Embrace the thrill of daily fantasy sports like never before in a new app coming soon.